can we rewrite the climate headlines? In other words, can we turn complex reality of climate change into stories that humans can understand and relate to? How can we captivate people with real-life examples of the effects of a warming world and inspire action? Rewriting the climate headlines is a practice-based research collaboration between alumni of the Royal Academy of Art, The Hague, and investigative journalists from Arish, Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism. And it presents a series of climate and nature stories based on substantial investigative reporting. And connected to those stories are installations by artists. And today we'll be focusing on falcons and illegal falcon trade and wildlife trade. So with me to discuss this are Ahmed Ashur. You are an editor and fact checker at Arish, and you completed a master program in international media studies at Bonn University, and you have taken part in a number of cross-border collaborative programs with CFRG's Arish and OCCRP. And Tracys, you're an environmental journalist whose work has been published in The Relevator, Daily Maverick, The Ecologist, and other media outlets. And you also run the Substack newsletter called The 4%, a reference to the very small percentage number of Earth mammals that also are wild. So I would like to start with you, Ahmed. This is a story about illegal falcon trade, and you have found strong indications of such illegal trade. Could you please go through what you have found in your investigation?
Thanks, David. Actually, and I'm happy to be here with you. Actually, we have investigated the immigration routes of the European falcons, and we have found out many realities or many findings in my story. First of all, I have found that there are hunting practices that are happening in Libya in the season between September and December. And I have found that the falcons are illegal traded in Libya. And afterwards, the falcons are smuggled through Egypt to the Gulf states. And we have tracked down one falcon who have been hunted, traded in Libya, and afterwards that this falcon was smuggled to Egypt. And in Egypt, this falcon actually was on the private jet that departed the Burj Al Arab airport, and it was directed to the United Arab Emirates. I think that it is the main point and main focus of my story, that we have been tracking down this falcon from the beginning of this base, immigration base, to the final destination of this falcon.
So you're tracking this one particular falcon in this story.
Yeah,
And what conclusions can you draw from this one example in the broader context?
actually, no. It is not only one example, because actually we also observed many falcons that have been smuggled and that have been hunted. But we try to focus on one falcon and take it as an example or a showcase, and afterwards that we can actually find other falcons, because as you know that it is time consuming task to find one falcon and track down this falcon. And we depend on the open source tools. We depend on um, um, some sources on the ground. We depend on many experts. And as you know, that it is so difficult actually to follow many falcons. But actually, we have focused on one falcon. But actually, also we observe that it is happening, and it is in common practices in Libya and in Egypt. But to track down one falcon from the starting point in Libya to the final destination, since that's it is the majority of the story, and it is our major focus on the story.
So looking at this particular route that this falcon took, what conclusions can we draw from it?
Okay, regarding actually the smuggling routes, as you know, that the falcons are protected by CITES convention. It means that the falcon shouldn't be traded, and even if the falcon should be traded, it could be happened based on the CITES convention and based on the license issued by the certain and relevant authorities. But it doesn't happen in Libya because Libya is under the war and there is unrest in Libya. So the hunting practices and the illegal trade happens in Libya, and afterwards, that this falcon is smuggled in Egypt or through Egypt. So Egypt is a transit point, and Falcon is traded in the United Arab Emirates and other Gulf countries because actually they have a track record of trading in falcons, and they are using the falcons in the sport. So we have here the long route of the falcons, the migration falcons. That can start in Libya, and the final destination is in the Gulf states.
So I want to let Dan come in. You took part in Ahmed's research and learned about this story. So, what were your immediate thoughts and reactions when you learned about this topic?
Uh, well, I collaborate with Jan Johan, who's not here in this video cast. But when we were confronted with the case, we were immediately quite fascinated because we didn't specifically know about this illegal trade. And also, what surprised us was the depth of the investigation and the amount of material there is on this specific falcon. Because the detail in the investigation is quite striking to see. We actually, Ahmed managed to produce an entire timeline of when the Falcon was captured, traded, smuggled, and then arrived somewhere, and from what airport to, or from what location to what location it was smuggled, and even managed to find actual footage of the capture and the trade, or not of the trade, but actually of the capture of this very Falcon and its transport. So it also immediately became very vivid and sort of very clear to us how well produced this case was. And on the more, yeah, I wanted to say emotional side of things, I think it was just very striking to see how these falcons were sedated, caught, smuggled in various ways, which I would never want to happen to an animal, but which was also very well documented, so to say. So there were a lot of pictures of uh, ways of trafficking falcons.
So, seeing these images on social media and elsewhere doesn't seem like there's no one tries to hide anything. Like there's no shame really. It seems like it's easy for them. Is it?
Well, I don't know if it's easy on them. I don't know if I would agree on this. I think Ahmed is maybe a better person to respond to this more in detail, knowing the cultural context. But um, I don't think it's easy for them. I think it's more of it's a sport. The Falcons are deployed in sports later on in Dubai in falconry, which was also quite an intriguing sight to see what this sports was like. I was never aware of this actual how that would take shape. I knew that falcons were used for hunting, but I didn't know there were competitions in this specific sport. But I don't know if it isn't very hushed or if it's. I feel like it's still quite a hidden industry, if you can even call it an industry. So I don't think it's that easy on them and on the traders. And I think it's also good to include that these falcons have a huge value for the traders themselves, knowing that they will sell them, and for the hunters, which of course is also something you can debate why they are, or how these prices come about, and why there's actually prices and why they should be hunted and traded. But I think that's also something that factors into the maybe the excitement you see in the videos because they've captured something which could possibly support them for a lifetime. Although that's something which is very estranging to me. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. There's big money in this, and that, of course, goes all along the chain from the buyers all along to the hunters who capture these birds. But going back to your artwork, What do you mainly want to convey? What kind of thoughts or emotions do you want to convey with it?
Maybe different, or answer to a different question, but what struck us both, me and Jan Johan, was that this story was sort of, it followed the single journey of only one falcon, but that falcon can be seen as a symbol or as a metaphor, as just only one falcon, but it's something that happens to many other falcons, but that their trajectories haven't been covered. So me and Jan Johan were already, in the first instance, quite fascinated by that fact that you could have this one falcon as a sort of symbol of this entire illegal trade. And I think this is what drew us into the case first and foremost, paired with the level of detail. And I think with that level of detail, it also allows for making an artwork and an installation that really is able to draw people into the story, and then to have them consider the larger industry that is looming behind the story of the single falcon. And I think that's what struck us most and what was most appealing to us to get across. And I think that in the sense of sort of an emotional point or a political point, for us it's more the act of being able to pose a question on this specific trade and on this specific event. Because for us it's more important to see how what do people feel about this, and how can we create or use our artwork and our installation as a platform to talk about this illegal trade and what people feel about this.
So Dan, if you describe the artwork, what does it look like? What is it?
Well, the artwork consists of two pieces. So one piece will be on hip height. It will be a world map, which will be displayed. And on the world map, you will be able to see this the route the Falcon followed, or actually the smuggling route, you could also call it. And then paired with that, there will be several screens mounted on the map itself, which will depict the videos of the capture and trafficking of the Falcon at the very site. So these screens will be mounted at the very site where the video was recorded. So it gives people an insight not only in the geographical sort of span of the smuggling route, but it also gives more in-depth content of the video capture of the events in the smuggling, so to say, the main phases, I would rather say. And then paired with that, we'll be displaying a set of passports, which will be specific Falcon passports. And this will be actually a part which consists of two different passports. So there will be one exclusive passport which will be completely, so to say, filled in. So this will be made exclusively based on the information we have on the smuggling of this very Falcon. So it will feature the details of this very Falcon, but also the places it traveled through. So you should imagine this as a human passport, but then adapted to fit with the Falcon. And then next to that, we'll present a series of neutral passports. And the amount of these neutral passports actually represents this hidden illegal trade in these falcons. And these passports will not only be neutral, but they will also be empty. So they will be a sort of visual reminder of the scope of this actual illegal trade. And these are the two pieces that will be presented.
All right, so this is the first time ever I hear about passports for falcons. And so the ones that were legally traded, those were the ones that were filled out and stamped and correct in order, right?
No, so there's only one passport which is filled out, and this is for the very falcon which we studied, or which Ahmed studied. So because this is the only falcon we have the full details of. The others we don't know. We just know of a number, a sort of scope of this illegal trade, but we don't know their trafficking routes. But we just want to alert people. Sorry.
So the route is unknown, as it were.
Yeah, the route of those is unknown. So we just want to make sure that people know that it's not only this falcon, but that there's many other falcons which are still to be, so to say, of which the smuggling routes are still to be uncovered.
So Tracy, what are your thoughts? You've been listening to Ahmed and Dan here. What does this story tell us about illegal wildlife trade?
So it tells us that the illegal wildlife trade is damaging to the species in question, and that it's significant, and that's not, although this specific peregrine falcon story is new to the world, the fact that the illegal trade is significant and damaging to species and ecosystems isn't. So I guess the important question is, what can be done about it? How can this be tackled, and how can peregrine falcons and other falcons be better safeguarded? So as has become clear in our discussion so far, it's a migratory species, and that's true of many raptors. They migrate across the world. So protecting them and monitoring them in their resident countries, in the countries that they fly through, is of course really important. And it does happen to some extent, but not enough currently. One of the main kind of international bodies that works on species like raptors is the CMS, the Convention on Migratory Species, naturally, because that's what they are. And there was a meeting this summer of the CMS where governments agreed to recognise and better protect thousands of sites, specifically in Europe, Asia, and Africa. So there is progress coming, or promised, I should say. But of course, as with every promise or pledge, governments need to implement those protections and that recognition on the ground to better protect the species. And I should also say that it's also important not only to implement the policies, but to enforce the policies when you're talking about protections. So I'm in the UK, and different to this story, but related to it, we have significant issues with the persecution of raptors for a different reason, not because they're captured and smuggled, but because they're killed due to the fact that they impact other activities that happen in this country. So we've mentioned that the peregrine falcons are used for hunting. Over here, we have a significant amount of hunting of other birds, such as grouse and introduced pheasants, and birds of prey can prey on those birds. So the raptors are persecuted here in order to effectively get rid of them so that they don't impact on this sport shooting that happens. So I mentioned that to say that even if you've got protections, you need to enforce them. That's really important. But yeah, so that's one of the things that I would say needs to happen in order to have some impact on what's happening.
So is that a big problem, that there is not enough international regulation and international standards that govern this trade?
I would say to some extent. So looking at that meeting that happened in the summer that I mentioned, the CMS meeting, various countries spoke about or submitted their information about what they were and weren't doing for raptors during that meeting. And there was, so I think Syria, for example, is another country that has some issues with the illegal capture of raptors, and a lack of funding or a lack of being able, having support on the ground to tackle it. I think, if I remember rightly, was one of the issues they mentioned. So yeah, and the CMS does do quite a lot on this group of species. They have various different mechanisms to tackle them, but even so, there isn't enough. Funding is a big issue in general with these sorts of agreements, but or actions that need to be taken. So yeah, there are issues surrounding that. However, as Ahmed said, there is one organisation which is collaborative, not an organisation, but one body that's collaborative, which does work together, and that's the CITES Convention. So CITES is the the Convention on International Trade in Wild Species and Endangered Wild Species, and they regulate the legal trade in species. But in doing that as well, they also have a remit to tackle the illegal trade in species. So that is a forum in which you can deal with some of these issues. And I should mention at this point as well, so obviously this story and this particular peregrine falcon was wholly illegally traded. It was captured in the wild illegally. It was transported, relatively covertly. But that there is, in addition to that sort of illegal trade, a large legal trade in raptors, in peregrine falcons, in gyre falcons, in sacker falcons. They're very popular birds, and that legal trade is not wholly, but mostly a trade in captive bred birds. And it was effectively put in place to try and eliminate illegal trade. That's true of CITES captive breeding provisions in general. They're created to try and avoid illegal and unsustainable trade in species. However, and again, so in terms of this story, the whole thing is illegal. But in other instances, there are connections between legal and illegal trade. They transect at certain points. So when you're talking about collaborative action, one of the things that could and should happen is making sure the legal trade in these species is completely airtight and there is no opportunity for the illegal trade to intersect with it in any way. So that's something that governments could do. And they can do that through a variety of different ways. So there are rules around this trade in captive bred birds and other captive bred species. So all governments who are party to this convention should fully implement the rules surrounding that trade. That's not happening with raptors at the minute. Completely. In fact, there was a CITES meeting relatively recently where both the UK and the EU were found to be in contravention of those provisions for captive bred trade. The specific reason that they were pulled up on it is that with this captive bred trade, particularly with species that are most at risk and therefore have the biggest protections, like the peregrine falcon and the gyre falcon, they are meant to be, anyone breeding them is meant to be registered with CITES. So you're meant to be on a list effectively in CITES to enable monitoring of those breeding facilities. But the UK and the EU do not have that in place fully. That some of their of the breeding facilities in their countries are registered, but not all of them. So they're not fully implementing that rule. And so at that meeting, it was a committee meeting. The committee decided to advise that that those countries should not be traded with, or those bodies of countries like the EU and the UK should not be traded with for these species because of them not abiding fully by the rules. And just to give you an example of what impact that can have, so I've spoken to the UK government after that, and they expect this to impact their trade, and therefore they're looking into what changes, whether changes need to be made and what those changes should be. So it is a powerful tool when used, CITES, to try and limit illegal trade and expand protections for species.
Yeah, so going back to Ahmed, when you have been listening to Tracy here, for our particular peregrine falcon, what would have needed to be in place in terms of regulation or control in order for this story to not have happened at all?
Yeah, actually, we need only to enforce the laws that are in place already, but actually the authorities ignore and turn a blind eye into enforcing and implementing the conviction and other treaties and laws even that's the authorities signs these conventions and those laws, and there are many laws are enacted in Libya and in Egypt and also in the United Arab Emirates, but all of them actually are ignored, since that if the authorities implement the laws and they don't consider the political issue, as I told you, that the United Arab Emirates have influence in Egypt as well as in Libya, and that's why actually they can pay for the traders, for the smugglers, for the middlemen, and also for the authorities. But actually, if we can leave out the political aspect of this story, we can find that the authorities can confront and they can implement the laws, and actually they can uh, confront this illegal trade, and they can seize the falcons maybe in the airports or in the borders between Egypt and Libya.
And in these countries that where the peregrine falcon is being captured and traded and transferred, is there any awareness of this issue? Is it talked about or debated?
No, there is no like a big tree, big debate in Libya, for example, because as you know, that Libya is under war and they have a track record of this culture to hunt the falcons and the trade in falcons, and also in the United Arab Emirates there are not big debate about the illegal trade in falcons, but actually in Egypt, I think that when we will publish the story, it will raise many questions about the role of the authorities to confront this trade. So it is also one of the real goal of my story to raise awareness among the citizens, even either the Libyan citizens or the Egyptian citizens, that we need actually to protect the falcons and we need to leave them in the wild, and to leave them to go through our countries to South Africa and to turn back to Europe without any hunting, because it will impact on the falcons, and actually it could have a negative impact on the biodiversity.
So Dan, you mentioned that these are established practices and something that has been going on for many years in the population in Libya and other places. And where do we stand on this? Should we at all allow legal trade of falcons? What do you think?
I don't know. I don't feel entitled to answer the question. On a personal From a personal point of view, I can say that I would advocate against any harm of animals and any trading in animals. But this is also a very utopian view, I think. I mean, it's so many products involve animals in so many ways. So to prohibit trade in any form of animals would basically require an entire change of the entire system. And I feel like the change should happen from both sides. So in that sense, I think it would be good. But um, I think for me, maybe another question to raise, which could also be interesting to debate, although it's a very long and lengthy debate, but it's something that me and Jan Johan discussed extensively, is we use this passport as a metaphor, of course, to make the falcon like a human, you could argue. And I think there's another aspect of the way I say we as in humans, deal with animals now, but also maybe in a broader sense with nature, although nature itself is also a phrase you can contest, so to say. But the aspect of attributing legal forms or entities to animals, plants, ecosystems, I think is a very interesting debate. And I think I also there want to make it very explicit that for us, this is a debate we want to start and instigate and continue with this work. Because I personally feel that for me, introducing Falcon passports, if it would ever be something that would be introduced, is just merely a step towards moving to a different system, because what is problematic for me is that this system implies that we as humans can still sort of integrate and emancipate these falcons into a human system, which is the human law. And I think this already is quite problematic, and it's also something that should be quite clearly discussed, how to go about this. And I think this is what is largely this debate is going on, because there are several states and nations and places that have started to hand out legal entities to ecosystems or animals themselves, which I think is good in the sense of um, the results you get from this, to some extent, of course. But I think the other side of this is something which is also very interesting and very relevant to debate, because also it's not a solution, I feel. And I think solutionism then is another term which is problematic and which you can discuss for hours. But I think this is quite a vital point to also highlight of this work.
So, Tracy, do you want to comment on that? About giving rights to non-human entities and working with these legislative and rights frameworks?
Yeah, so there is a growing, as Dan mentioned, a growing rights of nature movement, effectively, that is giving rights to species or ecosystems or rivers in various parts of the world, with the intention to better protect those beings, or those entities. And I think there is a lot of validity to that approach, because we do operate. So to take a step back, it is, of course, humans generally that have to make change.
So, a final question here for everyone, really. Do you have a positive outlook on this issue? Do you think we'll come to a solution anytime soon? Or do you have a more pessimistic outlook?
It is actually a hard question related to the Arab countries. And as you told us, the illegal trade is something common and it is well known among the citizens, and everyone knows that there is illegal trade in falcons and in other wildlife, but there is not many people that know the political aspect in it. And if we are talking about the political aspect, I think that it is so complicated, because actually the authorities should implement and enforce the law, but the authorities themselves can violate the laws because of the influence and political influence. I don't want to go deeper in my story. It will be published, and everyone will know the people who are involved in the stories. In my story, I mean, that's why actually I think that we will not find a solution. But for me, it is enough to shine a light on it and to actually to detect the people who are involved in these illegal trade, and maybe in the future we can hold them accountable, not even today or tomorrow, but I think that in the near future I hope that we can raise awareness among the people, and the people themselves can actually hold the involved people who are protected by influential politicians accountable. I hope, but actually right now I think that the story will go out, and based on the risk assessment, it could be risky for me, it could be risky for the local journalists who are working on the story, on the producers, I know, but I hope that in the future we can actually hold the people involved in this story accountable.
Mm, I don't know. I mean, about this very specific problem, I cannot tell. I think Ahmed is more aware of the cultural background to it and also the legal background of it. I think, in a larger sense, what it represents for the attitude of humans towards animals, I think there's a crucial transformation, a crucial switch to be made, and I think this is slowly happening. I would wish for it to be more swift and more rapid, but I think the momentum is building, which I think is good to see. And I think if we continue bringing in cases like this as artists, as journalists, and visualizing them and generating awareness, I think this will only aid in speeding up this transition. So I think that's what I can say as to whether or not I have a positive or a negative outlook. I think for me also this idea of a positive or a negative outlook, hope or no hope, I think there's no, for me the question of having hope is not the question or a thing I want to question. I don't want to be hopeless. I don't want to be desperate. So I choose to be hopeful. And in that sense, I think I can say that I'm positive about this.
Yeah, I think we do. I should say as well, so we've talked about the legal trading system. One of the most important things that all countries could do in terms of, like I say, making sure there's no segue from illegal trade into the legal system is to roll out an electronic permitting system across the world. So most countries in the world are party to CITES because they engage in legal trade of one sort or another. And currently we still have a predominantly paper-based permitting system for the legal trade in wildlife, which is very easy, of course, paper permits to use fraudulently or to exploit that element, whereas an electronic trading system or electronic permitting system would be much more robust. In fact, the CITES Secretariat not too long ago put out a kind of call on the importance of e-CITES, which said exactly that this would be and can be a key tool in tackling illegal trade in wildlife. But still, and it's been an option for a number of years already, but still it's very limited in terms of the uptake from countries. So obviously this story is about the MENA region. And I think in the MENA region, it is only Saudi Arabia that has implemented an electronic permitting system. So one thing that countries could do overall is to bring that in, because it would provide better safeguards for the legal trade. Just in terms of hope for us tackling biodiversity loss overall, be it falcons or the many other species that are at risk currently, there was a study recently that put the figure of species at risk of extinction at 2 million, and that's up from a report a couple of years ago that said that there's a 1 million, famously, that's repeated quite a lot, 1 million at risk. But a recent study said 2 million. So yeah, the stakes are high, and they're not just high for these species, they are high for us, because we do not exist in a vacuum. We are interconnected to all other species on Earth, and that's because species co-create ecosystems, essentially. So an ecosystem, a forest, just doesn't happen. It's there in the format it is, in the way it exists, because animals are doing stuff in that forest, such as distributing nutrients, or the way they interact with each other in the food chain in order to create that ecosystem. And ecosystems are what we rely on for the water we drink, or the clean water we drink, the air we breathe, the food we have, of course. So it's critical for us to tackle this issue of biodiversity loss just as much as it is for the species in question. So there is hope, because it has to be done. It's just as much of an existential risk for us as it is for the rest of the living world.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this crucial talk about illegal wildlife trade. It's been truly, truly enlightening. Thank you, Ahmed Ashur, editor at Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism, Dan Fairman, artist, and Tracy Keeling, freelance journalist. And don't forget to check out Tracy's newsletter, The 4%. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank us, guys. Bye.